Hello, this is Matthew Armstrong and welcome to Transformation Talk. Today I have the great pleasure of speaking with Sophia Cayer. She is an EFT coach and teacher. She also is only one of 29 people that has been globally trained as an EFT master by Gary Craig. So very few EFT masters out there. So it's a real pleasure to be speaking with you, Sophia. And you're also an author of a book, EFT Language. And also you're also a Reiki master and ordained minister as well. So yeah, I know you've got a lot to sort of bring to the table here, so to speak, and a lot of experience. So it's great to be speaking with you.
Well, thank you for having me. I always love any opportunity I get to talk about this work.
Okay, awesome. So first of all, just like to start with just getting an understanding of an insight into your understanding of the healing, with your vast experience of over 20 years working with people, being a Reiki master, an EFT master, ordained minister, and then all the work you did with Gary Craig and everything. Just maybe just give some background and your journey with healing and health, etc.
I think that one of the things that really brought me to EFT was the work that I was doing with people and watching how they would go up and down, back and forth. They do okay, but there wasn't like a solid foundation, if you will. There wasn't that ability to maintain a peace and just move forward. And I started researching, literally spent weeks, day and night, researching and finding different modalities, experimenting with them, because I knew there had to be more. There had to be something that would take it to a deeper level. And quite coincidentally, found EFT through a web page that a friend of mine forwarded to me.
Yeah.
And when the first thing that really caught me was at that point in time, which was many years ago, was through me, not by me, which I've always been a firm believer in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that began my journey, and this whole thing of just staying out of the way. Mm-hmm. Tuning in is what I call it, and trusting. Yep. And knowing that doing that allows an amazing transformation to happen with that person if you simply are tuned in and trusting. And it's not about, and I tell that to people all the time, they're doing the heavy lifting. I'm just here to kind of be guided and help you.
Yes.
And so the other thing that happens is, as we do this, again, it's not me doing anything except being there where they are in order to help them move through things. Mm-hmm. And recognizing that the physical being and the things that happen chemically in our body, that all of that, the body's natural ability to heal itself, is going to kick in and take over. Mm-hmm. And that applies to not just physical, it goes along with the emotional, because it's generating that balance, putting things back into balance.
Yeah. So you said there's something that kind of got you at first was through you, not by you. Could you just expand on that for anyone that might not quite understand that?
Well, it's one of the things I really jump into, especially with my students. Mm-hmm. And that is if we have an agenda, or if we think we are directing things, if you will, you're only going to get in your own way. You're going to slow down the process. It's an impossibility at that point to really be tuned in enough with whoever's in front of you. Mm-hmm. To pick up on what they're experiencing and to really get it.
Right.
And so that through me, not by me, is me. It is not me making it happen. Again, it's stepping out of the way and trusting that energy and that connection with that individual that you're working with happens as it should. We do what I call compassionately disconnected.
Right. Okay.
So that you're in tune with what's happening with that person.
Yeah.
And you're asking the right questions as you help them work through these things. but you're not directing traffic.
Okay. Yeah.
And
So
another important piece of that is trusting your intuition as well.
yeah, that's what I was about to say. It's intuition, just tuning in, having that intuition, and trusting in it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, and that's for all types of healing. For self healing, if we're helping somebody else, if we're facilitating somebody else's healing, it's just tuning in to ourselves. If there's some issues we have, it's supposed to just tuning in and asking what's the next best step, maybe.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so something that first attracted me to EFT was when I saw that Gary Craig was working with veterans, and basically maybe they'd been 20 years with post-traumatic stress, and then suddenly after a few sessions, or one session even, working with them, they were able to get rid of it. And that's what really, first of all, really kind of hooked me with it. And I know you've done like a lot of work with that, and you did the work with the documentary Operational Emotional Freedom, and
Yes.
worked extensively with veterans and with Gary Craig on that. Can you maybe talk a bit about that and some of the results that you saw, and maybe some insight into just how that works?
Yeah, and you bring up a very important point that I do want to talk about. And while amazing things can happen in one session, or 4 sessions, or 6 sessions, there is a misconception out there that it all goes away in that brief period of time.
Okay.
And it's simply, I haven't found that to be true. So a few things that have to be considered, and that is that different people are impacted in different ways.
Yeah.
And there's so many varying degrees and levels of post-traumatic stress. And so each situation has to be looked at as unique unto itself, which is the thing that I also say all the time, that each situation is totally unique unto itself, no different than we are as individuals. And so can a great deal of progress be made in 6 sessions or 3 sessions or even 1? Absolutely. But it is a process, and it always, in this sort of situation, requires follow-up, because we don't know what else is lurking under the surface, or if there are still repressed memories, if there's still things that happen. And it's more than just clearing events and experiences. You have to take it further. Because there is their ability, the belief system that happens with that individual about who they are, and their ability to interact with other people. All of those things come into play. There's a lot of different aspects and issues that need to be utilized.
Okay.
It's kind of like a reintegration process at the same time. And EFT is an amazing tool for that. So, can people make incredible progress in a very short period of time? Without a doubt. But that need to look at the different facets of their lives, and all of those pieces, and follow up to be sure where they are. And so for some, it could take 6 months or a year or more.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose it can be a deep forest where you're searching for the things that are going to make all that negativity crash down or collapse or whatever, yeah.
Right, and if some of it crashes down, there's new things that start popping up too, which is another thing that happens, because truly it's a layering that's taken place.
So can you explain just why EFT is effective with trauma and post-traumatic stress? How does it work with it?
Well, one of the beautiful things is that it will allow people to begin to alleviate whatever they're experiencing emotionally and physically as a result of it, without necessarily having to get into the fine details of the experience. There's several different ways to do that with this process, but it can work very gently. That doesn't mean that you're going to be able to avoid people experiencing a meltdown or high levels of intensity.
Yeah.
But it makes it much easier so that those disruptions in the energy system become neutralized.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even beyond that, I also do some work with them that I call transforming the energy, utilizing EFT so that energy of fear or discomfort, whatever it is, can be, it's empowering them to transform it to exactly what they feel they need.
Okay. Trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder, it's something that we think that, mainly people that have come back from war have, veterans, etc. But it's trauma especially is something that we've all experienced to some level, to some degree in our lives, and to some level, to some degree, I suppose it's holding each one of us back in some way. So even, and I think as we talked at the beginning, you talked about even birth as well, and I think birth's a big one. So even if it's unconscious, we are all suffering from some sort of trauma. Would that be right?
Absolutely. If I can't imagine how you have existed on the planet if you haven't experienced something, including the birthing process itself.
Yeah.
And I literally have worked with people who can remember that process.
Can you talk a bit about that, even like trauma with the birthing process, etc.?
Well, it is, if you think about it, it is it is a traumatic sort of thing. You've been nurtured and kept safe in the womb, and then all of a sudden you're into bright lights and somebody's smacking you around and what is this? Right. And literally I have had people, and one that will always stands out in my mind, that the trauma, which she remembered vividly, was so intense that it impacted her for years and years and years before she was finally able to find EFT and we cleared it. But there was it was a difficult birth, and they were passing her around, and different nurses and doctors doing all kinds of ridiculous things to her, between smacking her and doing this and doing that, and it took a great deal of time to help her get beyond that, because it left her very insecure and constantly anticipating the worst.
Yeah. So I suppose pretty much all of us have had some sort of trauma in birth, some people more than others, especially if we've had hospital type births where we've been smacked and things poked into our faces and taken away from the mother. It's things like that, I suppose.
Sure.
So maybe that's something that everybody can relate to if they've had some sort of trauma with that. Could we maybe, and even if it's unconscious, how do we deal with it if it's unconscious? If we say, okay, I suppose let's suppose we had a traumatic birth, how do we deal with that with EFT, even if we don't have any memory of it?
Even if you don't have any memory of it, there is a process that you can work with EFT, and it's simply addressing that infant. Okay. I've even done work with addressing the child while it was still in the womb, because the trauma happened before they even hit the planet. Right. In other words, if there's a chaotic environment while the mother's carrying a baby, that infant is absolutely impacted by it.
Right.
When you hear people talk about that kid was a nervous wreck from the time they were born, and I don't get it. It's remarkable what you'll find out was going on while the child was still being carried.
Right. Yeah. So could we could we do some EFT with this, just that viewers can tap along with? Would that be possible?
Yeah, we could do that. So we're going to address the child in the womb. Is that the idea?
Sure. The child in the womb, the birth, whatever you think is most important. That's across the board, maybe.
Okay. Well, let's just start with where we were talking about, and we can kind of go from there.
Okay.
Or do you have something special yourself that you don't even have to share with me, which might be a good way to demonstrate too?
I think birth's a good one. I had a hospital birth in Belfast in the mid 70s. I'm sure they weren't too up to date on being very nice and gentle. And yeah, I was told I had a traumatic birth. I think it was quite tough for my mother and everything. So yeah, I think birth's a good one.
Okay, all right. Um, because that stress that mom had obviously can have that impact, just like what we were talking about. If there's a chaotic environment around when she's pregnant.
Hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
So where do we start?
let's just go to the karate chop. Are you familiar with
Yep.
the point?
Yep. So
Okay.
karate chop.
Karate chopping. Okay. Even though this infant boy
Even though this infant boy
doesn't understand what's happening,
doesn't understand what's happening,
he was so comfortable and cozy.
he was so comfortable and cozy.
What's all this commotion?
What's all this commotion?
I'm loving and comforting this little boy,
I'm loving and comforting this little boy,
assuring him
assuring him
that he's okay now.
that he's okay now.
This frightened little boy,
This frightened little boy,
not understanding what's happening.
not understanding what's happening.
What happened to all the comfort?
What happened to all the comfort?
What's all this terrible noise?
What's all this terrible noise?
These bright lights,
These bright lights,
all these giants around me.
all these giants around me.
I'm loving and comforting this little boy,
I'm loving and comforting this little boy,
assuring him
assuring him
that he's much safer now.
that he's much safer now.
Okay. Just take a nice deep breath for a second. Just let me know if anything comes up for you, because frequently when you start doing this, there will be emotions that may come up, even if there's no images or distinct memories.
Hmm. Well, I felt that I did connect more to my actual birth, where I had maybe associated more with it. Where when you talked about the big giants standing around, I felt like I was lying there looking up, and it'd been rather alien.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting if you do that connection.
Yeah.
And I think another important part with the trauma is that even as we are very little people and going through the process of growth and coming of age for school and all those things, that there are a lot of those feelings about kind of being alien, if you will, or disconnected. And I think that far too many times children are taught that their emotions are to be either tucked away, or that there's something wrong, or they are minimized.
Yep.
And those are things that frequently come up with people who have that are dealing with post-traumatic stress, because it can come in so many different forms. It doesn't necessarily have to be about a war,
Yeah. Yeah.
because it's a war for them with what they're experiencing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a lot of people do have a war raging in their own heads, even though there might not be anything happening on the outside.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, I noticed when we tapped there. I don't think we said I accept and love myself, etc. Anything like that. Is that not necessary? Do you use that much, etc.?
Well, it goes back to each situation being unique unto itself.
Mm-hmm.
There are times when it is appropriate, and there's other times that other words can have a greater impact.
Right, right.
And so, again, it's that tuning in and knowing, feeling what's right in the situation.
Mm-hmm.
So I love and accept myself, or I trust and respect myself. There are a zillion different variations.
Mm-hmm.
And especially when you begin to do the deeper work, there's that need to be tuned in to precisely what's going on with that, with an individual again, instead of tied to like a rote routine or a more mechanical version of language and tapping.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so even if we don't have a conscious memory of something happening, just to tap on it anyway, and just to see what comes up, would that be the right thing to do?
Yeah, absolutely. Because you're going to be amazed. It's like what you just experienced with that brief little piece that we did.
Mm-hmm.
You do start to connect, because if we remember that we hold these things in our bodies on a cellular level,
Yeah.
there's an imprint there.
Yes. Yeah.
So even if there's no memory recall, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. They call it like a limbic imprint, right?
Yes, and when you start, when you begin to acknowledge it, then it's amazing what you're going to find you may discover.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not just with like the giants for you, for someone else they might have remembered someone else coming in the room and doing something else, or startling them, or dropping them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Things like that happen.
Okay. ADHD is another one of your specialities, and I think it's something that's probably quite misunderstood, what ADHD is. How come you went into this area of ADHD, and can you just give us an understanding of what it is? Because I've read some books on it myself, and different people have different understandings of what it is, and some people see it as a gift, and others see it as a hindrance, etc. Could you give us an understanding from your perspective?
Well, my perspective may not necessarily be the most popular perspective.
That's okay.
But that would be pretty typical for me.
Okay.
With one of the things that got me interested in ADHD more was the children that I had the opportunity to work with. That's one of the things that drew me to it, and just seeing the need, seeing the struggle, seeing the frustration in people of all ages, but especially children trying to work their way through school, get an education.
Yeah.
But ADHD, I feel, first of all, to the best of my knowledge, there's not a definitive test, if you will, that can prove that this is it, you have it.
Yeah.
It's pretty subjective. It's answer these questions and so on and so forth, which goes along with some of the frustration I have around the way that post-traumatic stress is also measured. I've said this to people involved in research with it. Where's the human element to this?
Yeah, the individual.
You can't tell me that based on what's written on this piece of paper, somebody needs to be checked in to a facility somewhere.
Yeah.
Did you have a conversation with this person? No. Well, did you try to find out if something happened that day that this got filled out? So to me, that's one of the missing pieces with the stress, the post-traumatic stress. And ADHD, by the way, will generate incredible levels of stress. One of the big pieces is that the self-esteem issue.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of emotions attached to that, embarrassment and shame and so on and so forth. And if we take our time and begin to take it apart one bite at a time, it's amazing the transformation that will happen with people.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think it's very misunderstood. I think that way too many times it is misdiagnosed.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's easier to put something in a box than it is to try to really find out what's going on with someone,
Yeah.
and help them, because the label itself is incredibly damaging.
Mm-hmm. And especially with that label, then what's offered is medication. So there's all these kids getting put on to this medication that are in school, which is bringing them down, and then they're depressed, and then they get put on to antidepressants to make them not depressed, and the combination causes can cause major like mental issues as well. So I think maybe that's one of the biggest like real disasters with kids getting diagnosed with ADHD is all the medication they're getting put on for it, which is making them worse.
Well, the amazing thing is, yes, and it's heartbreaking to see how much of that goes on. But one of the beautiful things is I've had parents bring children to me of all ages that have managed to, well, they brought them because they don't want to put them on drugs, or they've absolutely refused to put them on drugs.
Yeah.
And the school then begins to put pressure on them.
Yeah.
But I have watched children be able to not have to deal with the drugs.
Okay.
And manage incredibly well with school, have their grades excel, their behavior reports improve. One child in particular that I worked with had gotten a negative behavioral report almost every day of his school career. And I think I started working with him when he was in third grade. And very rapidly, I learned, first of all, that there was trauma in the home, or a lot of chaos. So that was one of the things affecting him.
Yep.
He learned how to deal with that on his own, which he was incredibly pleased with. But his mother came to me one day and she said he has now, for the first time in his life, made it through 6 weeks of school with no negative reports, and his grades are climbing.
Okay.
Rapid.
Great. What age is that? Third grade. What age is?
He was about 8 years old.
All right. And so how did you work with him, or how would you work with somebody with ADHD who's been diagnosed?
Well, a big thing is the self-esteem issue and how they feel about the label. And we have to always factor in that each situation, again, is unique unto itself. Finding out what's going on the home front, because typically there are other emotional factors or disruptions that are when we're trying to put people in that box again. There's typically a lot of other factors that are driving that create that.
Right.
And so taking that apart, and also, especially with children, it's trying to get them excited about the possibilities with this instead of dreading doing this stuff.
Yeah.
So one of the things I do with them is always start by getting them to tap on something that they want to improve. Like if they love baseball, if they start tapping on being able to hit better, or something that gets them excited, then they're more open to the process.
Okay.
But I think that the self-esteem issues, all the exterior elements, definitely have to get dealt with. The reading aspect is typically a big one. And some experimenting with various types of books. In other words, just as an example, a textbook versus a comic book. or versus a book with a little more depth. I found children can read a college level book in elementary school that supposedly have ADHD and pronounce multiple syllable words without stumbling, but put a simple textbook in front of them and they stumble.
Why is that?
Part of it is sometimes it's the classroom experience. Sometimes it has to do with the teacher. Sometimes it has to do with, again, the self-esteem issues. There are so many different pieces that are there.
Yeah.
It's just like the hyperactivity. Finding out what the triggers are,
yeah,
and working preemptively with it.
Yeah.
So it's again, it's a process. It's exploring and finding out what is happening with that individual and what's impacting them.
Yeah. So it's not something that you think a person is born with. They're just like that. It's something that happens through things happening in their childhood.
They definitely can be born with it.
Right.
Okay, just like when we were talking about the birth trauma.
Yeah.
The trauma of what was going on while that child was being carried. I've seen that many times.
Yeah.
When people bring troubled children to me or say, this kid's impossible and so on and so forth, but you find out that even before birth, because we are impacted. If you think about it, everything that's flowing through your mother's body is flowing through you. So why wouldn't you be impacted by their fears, their nervousness?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and it does.
Yeah.
So there's not it's not an ABC. Do this, and this. I think there are a lot of important elements connected. But being patient and exploring and recognizing that each situation is completely unique. It's just not a cookie cutter kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, so I suppose that's an important distinction with healing is we've got to go all the way back to the beginning of before birth, being in the womb, and who knows, even before that maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's different for different people. And how far do you want to take the process, and where do you find yourself now?
Yeah.
What's important for you? What are your goals? What are you looking to achieve with this?
Okay. The questions are important, asking those specific questions, right?
Tons of them.
Okay. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And just taking it step by step. If we don't know what the maybe the issue is, we just know that we're not feeling good or life's not working properly for us, then just start with, even if we don't know, just start, and then things will open up. Would that be right?
Yeah, well, yes. One of the other things that I do specialize in, Matthew, is getting to core issues. Okay. So when someone is walking around with that, I don't know what's wrong and this isn't working and I don't understand what it's all about, there's very specific ways that you can get to those core issues.
Okay.
Even if someone doesn't have a clue, but it's through doing specific tapping processes and through specific questions, and it's a step-by-step process that doesn't have to take a long time. But again, it's going to be different for each individual.
Okay. Is there any sort of general practical, way or process that you can offer right now that people can do?
Well, sometimes you're better off when you're trying to go after, let's say, core issues, try to get to why it just feels this way. You're better off to work with somebody who may be able to offer some guidance.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's, we can't see the forest for the trees. But if someone went after it on their own, if they just simply began by tapping on, even though it just feels like my life isn't working, but doing something simple and getting out of the way and trusting whatever comes to mind, even if it sounds ridiculous to them at first.
Yeah.
It's going to take them down a trail that's going to give them other clues, and many times memories will pop up, or flashes, somebody's words, somebody's face, something, or just sometimes, many times, just an emotion. But it's connecting the dots and following the trail.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Your book, EFT language, creating it and going with the flow. Yeah. That's a creating it and going with the flow, right?
That's it.
Yeah.
And going with the flow part is the most important.
Right. Right. Can you tell us a bit about that? You know, why you wrote it, and what specifically is in there?
Well, there's many tips. There's many case histories. Some that were written about some pretty complex situations. But it is trying to help people understand that let's see. Creating the language, again, goes back to being in that flow. Okay? And it's trying to help people get the fact that if you start tapping on one particular issue and all of a sudden something else pops up, don't slam the lid on it.
Yeah.
And go back to where you were. Go with that predominant piece. So it's tips and techniques and how to flow through it, but it gives very specific cases and examples so that you understand the process, that going with the flow.
Yeah.
And one of the things that prompted it was people constantly talking to me about their concerns and fears about, I won't get it right, I don't know the words to say, so on and so forth. And that's the other thing that the book offers, is how you can and should feed the language even that people you might be working with, including yourself, are using, because those are obviously the words that are resonating for them. But it kind of gives you an idea how to pull it apart and weave it together.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else in particular that you'd like to share? Maybe something that the biggest learning you had as an EFT master, or anything you'd like to share?
Well, I could regale you with 100 stories or more, I'm sure.
Right. Yeah.
I think one of my favorites, which I would love to share, and there's a piece about this in the book, by the way, is the Hank Hadley story. He was diagnosed with MS. He had been in a wheelchair, I think, 5 years when I first met him, and he has now been completely. He was on disability for 20 plus years as well. Multiple issues, but the bottom line is that in I believe it was 2004, we went through this process, and he not only threw away his wheelchair, but went off of disability and has been doing perfect ever since.
Wow.
So there were multiple trauma issues involved. There were multiple emotional components involved. But it just goes to show you what patience and persistence can accomplish.
How much EFT did you do with him, or did he do as well for that to happen? It wasn't like 5 minutes tapping. This stuff doesn't work, you know.
No, not quite. We did. Hank was and still and remains to be a remarkable individual. And once he decided that it did work, and he let me know right up front that he was skeptical. He became a tapping fanatic.
Right.
When he started having pain relieved, when he started being able to do more physically, when he recognized and he got that the emotions were driving the discomfort, he would tap like crazy. And so I worked with him very intensively for about 4 months but we were doing, let's say, probably 3 or more hours a week, one-on-one time, split up. But he was tapping himself constantly on his own, as much as he could.
Yeah, yeah.
And so at the end of about 4 months, he would do things like forget his arm crutches.
Yeah.
You know, and then he just started recognizing that, you know, some of it had become like habit. And he actually, Gary Craig actually has him on film doing jumping jacks.
Oh, yeah.
After he recovered through this. But he still taps, and it's just for people to get the fact that patience and persistence pays off with this.
Yeah.
And recognizing that it is all blended, the physical and the emotional.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And how can you explain that? How something that is said to be a physical thing like MS, where he's in a wheelchair, and you know, how can the tapping work? Can you explain that, like scientifically, how it works, or?
Well, I don't know that anybody can. We all have our theories,
Right.
but can we prove it? Who knows? But I feel that what happens is the emotional components are always there first, and when the emotional components aren't dealt with, then it builds and builds and builds until it begins to take shape physically somewhere in our body. We have a reaction, and so that's what, in my opinion, generates the dis-ease, if you will.
Yeah, yeah.
And so when we go after it, as Hank, even as an example again, there's a need to very specifically address the physical components as well as the emotional, but recognizing that the emotional is the driver.
Yes. Yeah.
And also recognizing that, like people I worked with head injuries and things of that nature, and they get it in their mind, or they're told, they're given limiting beliefs by various people, that we can change the chemistry, and we can tap very specifically on those things.
Yeah, yeah.
It's that weaving and that integration between the physical and the emotional.
Very, very, very empowering. Very empowering to understand that, for sure, and know that we have a simple practice that can make that happen and can change things.
It's tuning in. It's patience and persistence.
Awesome.
Being creative.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an amazing story, amazing testimony as well, for someone to come out of a wheelchair, and he's been MS symptom free for what 7 years is it, or something? More?
Yes.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, so how can we find out more about you? How can we get in touch with you? You offer consulting or coaching services, and you also do workshops, etc. Tell us what else you do and what you do, and how do we get in touch with you?
Well, I don't even know where to start here. The best thing to do to learn more about me is you can go to sophiacayer.com, or you can go solacewithsophia.com. Both of them will take you to the same place, which is my main website, and you can learn a great deal about what I do, and the fact that in addition to one-on-one sessions, I do custom designed workshops and trainings, as well as a lot of in-depth training for trauma and abuse, different variations thereof, and am passionately dedicated to this.
Awesome. Whereabouts are you situated? You're on the East Coast somewhere?
Yes, I'm in Florida.
In Florida, okay.
East coast of the U.S.
Yeah.
and I happily work with people all over the face of the planet.
Awesome.
So, yes, I'd be happy to answer questions and create whatever we can to get this out there further.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's very, very exciting times. Thank you very much, Sophia. It's been a real pleasure to speak with you and get your deep insight and understanding with EFT and some of the deeper issues as well. Because it's something that, like you said, everyone has some sort of trauma, and we can all, even if we're unconscious of it, and even if we don't know it's holding us back, how much further could we go? Because some people think, well, I don't have any trauma, my life's perfect, but how more perfect could it be, if that unconscious thing wasn't holding you back? So
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
so it's something we can all keep working on and to improve things and make them better. And I really appreciate the work you're doing. Appreciate the time you took this morning to speak with me and all our viewers as well. So thank you very much. Much appreciated.
My absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me, Matthew.